So context is often not acknowledged. Our attention goes to the actors or entities in the scene and the actions that are happening between them. And we don't pay much attention necessarily to the background. But the person who is doing a performance that has no audience, and the audience being supportive or antagonistic, that's one of the most obvious examples of context shaping what happens. And it's particularly important because the systems we live in are contexts for everything that's going on. Everything that we're doing, everything we're thinking, everything we believe and think is real is this, how we've grown up in this environment and the stories that we tell ourselves and this, how everybody else around us is thinking and responding. This is shaping in very powerful ways. It's almost like a form of leadership. So the same actions in different contexts, as I gave the example of a performer, create different outcomes and have different meanings. And you can dress in a business suit and go into an office and nobody notices. If you dress in a business suit and go to a hippie rock concert, you're going to really stand out, and people are going to think you're strange. So it's like context, cultural context, and people. There are cultures where it's considered it's natural for people to stand very close to each other, and when they're talking to each other, and other cultures where they're keeping considerable distance. And there's a book I read once that talked about the diplomatic meetings where you have these they're having their relaxing cocktail hour and talking to each other, and people are moving around the room because one person is backing away to get from the other person. The other person is moving forward in order to be close to the other person. And it's just this strange thing. It's dictating the motions of the people in the room without them often being even aware that it's happening. So the environment, what kind of environment? Is this a beautiful environment? Is it all, concrete environment? Is it an environment that's very noisy or quiet? Is it your culture, whatever? The mindsets of people. You walk into a dialogue or deliberation, and you have history with these other people, and you resent them because of what they've done to you. You might not be thinking of what you've done to them, but you have a mindset that goes, I don't trust these people. And if you trusted them, you would have a very different interaction with them. And values, you value honesty and openness, and somebody else values privacy. These do not go well together. And expectations, you expect that what's going to happen is we're going to all be friendly, and that somebody else expects that what's going to happen is we're going to efficiently get through our agenda. Again, having this, I'm giving examples of clashing context. We have individual context and collective context, but all of them have power. Situational dynamics and power relations. Often it's talked about the people who are marginalized. You have the white men, the older white men who traditionally have more power than others, and kind of presume their privilege, their role, and then people of color or women who are habitually more withdrawn because of the power relations. And you have your meeting. You need to be aware of what's going on in that realm, and make efforts to ensure that the people who tend to not speak up have a chance to speak up, etc. But you're aware. If you were a facilitator, for example, or a convener of a conversation, you are looking at who's being invited, what are the historical relationships, what are the power relationships, how are we going to counter those aspects of those contextual factors to facilitate more wisdom generation in the group. You have to be aware of that. You can't just assume everybody's equal and it doesn't matter where they come from or where they're sitting or whatever. All those things matter. And the more you can take into account, the better off you'll be. People, that's one of the powers of nonviolent communication, is it goes down to people's needs. And people have different need profiles. Everybody kind of has the same needs, but in some situations, some conflicts, whatever, some people's needs are more vivid for them than others, and it may not fit with what the needs that other people have. And so you're trying to be aware of who's coming with what kinds of needs, how do you need to address those. So all these things matter, and seeking wisdom, because overlooking these things will have consequences, and our definition of wisdom is taking into account what needs to be taken into account for long-term broad benefit. One of the categories of things that needs to be taken into account is the context, the internal and external contexts in which people find themselves. And so we're trying to take that into account when we're exploring something, when we're looking at an issue. How does the context play a role in how that issue is unfolding? And when we set things up, it's like, are we going to be in a closed off concrete room with a podium in the front and a bunch of chairs lined up facing the podium, or are we going to be in a wooden room with light streaming in and a bunch of plants and sitting in a circle? I mean, those are radically different contexts, and usually we would probably want the latter, but maybe sometimes we want the former. But we're conscious that this is a major factor, and then how we proceed, what we do. Whenever we are taking an initiative, it's important to look at the context into which we are bringing whatever kind of intervention we're bringing. So that's it, and just it's context awareness. And the more aware we can be of more dimensions of context, because context is not one thing, the more likely we will be dealing with the matter in a wise and successful way. Listening projects and all activities that involve listening. Listening is a great tool for let's see, I realize I've drifted away from my position here. So among the methods and approaches for context awareness are listening. So whatever's going on, if it's a human situation, and sometimes even in a not human situation, you need to listen, ask questions, see what people say, feel what the energy is. And there are formal organized listening projects that I have wrote descriptions of on the cointelligence.org website. And there's also ways of analyzing the power dynamics. What's the field, the power fields, like a magnetic field. It's like, what's going on? Who are the players and what sorts of power are they bringing into the situation? It's another tool to become aware of that. Concerns and needs. Concerns is such a powerful leverage. And that's one of the other patterns, is all concerns addressed. But it's like the life energy that people have in their needs and their values, the things that they want, that are directing them, the motivations that they have. And where those get blocked, concerns show up, objections show up, violence shows up. But underneath the objections and the violence, there's concerns and needs. Concerns, is a way, trying to unpack people's concerns is a way to tap into those underlying motivational dynamics. And the more you learn about that, the more you understand, this is why this is going on. This is the internal psychological context for what's happening. Mapping is a way of going into a community or a situation and looking who has the capacity to do what in terms of individuals, in terms of organizations. And it's not looking for problems so much as to understand what are the resources. And once you start asking the right questions, you discover, the old woman who is confined to the wheelchair is fabulous with babies. It's like this woman who has supposedly no capacities actually has these capacities. And that could be fit with somebody else's need. So there's a sense of understanding, using asset mapping to not just fulfill other people's needs, but to sense what's the whole of what's possible here as part of the context when you're trying to help out a community. Multicultural training to understand the kinds of dynamics that I was talking about before in terms of closeness or distance, or the assumptions underlying different cultures that in India, if you are picking at the shared food with your left hand, nobody else is going to touch that food because the right hand is what you do that with. And there's reasons for hygienic reasons for that. But that's, if you don't know that, if you're just some ignorant American stepping into that context, you could do tremendous faux pas. So learning, if you're going to be involved with another culture, learning something about what the culture is you're going to be in. Family systems therapy is an interesting application of systems consciousness because the different people, they have their own personalities and stuff, but in the context of the family, they manifest particular roles because of who everybody else is and what the history is. So understanding the narratives that are playing out within the family, who's doing what because of what. That's family systems therapy is an example of becoming very conscious of the context and not just the systemic context and not just the personalities of the people involved and who's doing what right and wrong. And ecology, of course, is that's all about context. What life forms and natural entities, including water and rocks and whatever, how does all this fit together into one larger context? Every entity in the system is part of the context for every other entity, and being aware of that. Ecosociology is an ecological form of sociology where looking at natural, our human dynamics are reflections of existing dynamics in nature. And that takes a lot of the insights about context that ecology has and applies them to sociology. History, talk about context. Look in the Mideast. Tell us that these people are just people working out their problems in the present time. Like, no, the history is possibly the most dynamic thing that's going on there. And you need to accept that and work with that as part of whatever you do there, because that's what's unfolding, is the next wave of a very deep history that has lots of abuse and struggle and oppression and whatnot in it on all sides. Paradigm studies. This paradigm is a worldview. It's the way we think individually, and how that's part of the way we think collectively. So learning what the worldviews of different groups and societies are is part of understanding the context you're working with. Anthropology is looking at culture, the ways people behave together in communities and groups. Demographic analysis, you're going to say you're going to work in a community. Well, how many old and young people are in that community? How many black and white people are in that community? How many Republicans, Democrats? The more you understand about who is involved in a demographic sense in the situations and groups that you're working with, there's certain implications for different arrays of that kind of diversity. And going back to listening, interviews with stakeholders or adversaries in a conflict, you're going to go consult with a corporation to resolve a conflict, and before you step into, the collective scene, interview the individuals. What are they? How do they frame what's going on? How do they see it? And sort of sense what's the gestalt, what's the whole picture here that you're stepping into to try to help resolve. It can provide you with guidance for what to do next. So those are all examples of the power of context.